So I've got a question before I start. Do you want the good news or the bad news that I'm going to be giving you first? You want the bad news? Well, that's an interesting place to start. All right, I'll keep that in mind, right? So I'm really privileged to be invited here to talk about transformation, but particularly I love the word that's been used, a very poetic word, metamorphosis. And the reason I really like that you've chosen that word is because metamorphosis, the word metamorphosis, distinguishes something that often gets confused. And it's a difference between the word transformation and the word change. And we saw a beautiful little video of the butterfly and the caterpillar and how it becomes, how it turns into or transforms into a butterfly. And if you look at how that process works, you have this thing called a caterpillar, and it goes through this very awkward process. And that's something I'm going to talk about, is that transformation is an awkward process. It might look great from the outside, but imagine when a caterpillar is wandering along, eating stuff and having a good time, and it suddenly starts to go through this process and gets covered in goo, and it's not very pleasant. Not that it's got consciousness, but if it did have consciousness, it's not very pleasant, right? So it's an awkward process. And then something happens and a butterfly emerges. Now, what's critical about that is the butterfly can't go back to being a caterpillar. So that's what a transformation is. It's when something is changed state quite fundamentally and it can't go backwards. Whereas change is a linear process. And a really simple example is a glass of water. If you take a glass of water and you put it in a freezer, you cool it down, it turns into ice. If you bring it out again, it turns back into water. And if you look to that water and analyze the water and drank that water, it'd be exactly the same. Nothing's changed in it. So it's just a change of state, right? So we're going to be talking about transformation. And having heard the other people speak, we're going to talk very much about social transformation, about personal transformation, and I'm very excited about the commitment that I heard in people to actually transform essentially the world, to make the world a better place. So I think that's another context for this conversation about transformation. We're talking about transformation into something better, all right? So as you'll find out as I talk more, my life has been about transformation, not necessarily by design. My career has been about it, and as I'll talk a little bit more, my personal life has been about it. And in 2007, I moved to Australia. And the reason I moved to Australia, I was very interested in what was happening in Asia, and I wanted to work in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia. And even today, if you look through the lens of Western media, we're very obsessed with Europe and America like we are the center of the world. But actually, there's a very profound transformation happening in Asia, which to some extent I think is where everything's pivoting. And I wanted to kind of find out about that and learn about it. So off I went, on a journey. So I became an immigrant in a different country, and I'd never been an immigrant before. And it was really interesting being an immigrant in the country because some of it, particularly in Australia, where they speak English, was kind of familiar, and some of it wasn't familiar. And I suddenly got interested in how Australia happened because it was a former British colony, and why weren't they still British? Why were they different? How they developed this it's a very young country, and they developed a different accent and different ways of being and different stories, and it was really quite different. So I started to look into that and asked, how does a culture transform? How does it actually happen? And I went and found academics and I read about it, and it was kind of interesting, right? Because what I discovered and what I heard and what I was told about was if you look at families who emigrate to another country, what happens to them is they tend to become more the country than they came from. So the British become more British, right? Because they want to hang on to the culture they're leaving behind. So the parents want to remember cultural traits and religion or whatever it is, And particularly where I lived in Melbourne, there's a big Greek community. And it turns out that the Greek people, Melbourne's the biggest Greek community outside of Greece. And the Greeks there are kind of more Greek than in Greece, right? Because people have moved there and they've hung on traditions, and meanwhile Greece has changed, right? So when Melbourne Greek people go back to Greece, they go, this isn't Greece, it's changed, So it's not the parents. So how do things transform? And the answer is it's children. So what you have in schools and what you have particularly in streets and neighborhoods, especially in a country like Australia when it was being formed, is you'd have people from the UK and Italy and Ireland and all these different places coming together. And their parents were probably trying to hang on to their kind of customs, but the kids would have to broker something. And once you start to look at the people that came into the country and listen to the accent, you can see it's this kind of hybrid. And what I found really interesting about that is once I started to apply that thinking to my work is what I realized that profound transformation rather than change always comes from the bottom up, always comes from the young people. So that's why I asked you, do you want the good news or the bad news, right? Because we're in a university. This is a very young audience. So in terms of the world at the moment, we seem to be going through this period of really profound change, There's a lot of turbulence, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of upset, there's a lot of conflict going on around the world. You know, we have this transformation in terms of politics, which is beginning to fracture. Our economy is not working the way we understand anymore. We have an identity war going on all around the world, and we're all struggling to try and work out how to kind of make it work in this new world order. So the bad news is, you're it. You know, and I think that's the thing I want you to sort of take away is you are the young people. You're it. There isn't any cavalry, and there's no one out there who's going to kind of figure this out. So this is why I'm really excited about what I'm hearing about today. You know, when I look at the conversations that people are having around identity, around gender, around street transformation, neighborhood transformation, about language. You know, really trying to figure this out. So that's the exciting news. But the good news is you're it. Right? So, you know, this is what I find exciting about it. There is no big picture out there at the moment. We're living in a time where there isn't really a global vision. There isn't really a national vision. That's why we're so much conflict. So, you know, we've got an opportunity here to make a really profound difference. So, what I'm going to do is share a little bit about my sort of journey. Particularly in my sort of personal journey rather than my business journey, actually. You know, I talk a lot about business and change because that's what I do for a living, but really it's my personal journey and my accidental kind of transformation that's kind of informed my life and might be most useful. And sort of share a model which might be useful to think from, because even though, as it said in the video, transformation is a very personal process, I think there's a framework which is common. And if you're really interested in how do I transform my life, how do I transform business, how do I transform a society, I've got a framework I'll share with you, which I think is kind of useful. And I've had people say to me in my business world, why do you share this? You know, why do you give it away, right? And there's two reasons. First of all, I think one transformation we need in our society is to shift from this idea of scarcity and hoarding to sharing. You know, like anyone who's involved in sort of digital technology, the idea of open source thinking, where we kind of share our thinking and stuff happens to it and we get it back. So that's the first reason. But the other thing is I found out most people don't want to take the journey of transformation. And you'll kind of see why. And it takes a certain kind of brave person, a certain kind of courage and a certain kind of tenacity, you know. And I'm hoping that some of the people in this room, from what I've been hearing about this event, will be the people that take on some kind of profound transformation and leading that. All right, so that's what I'm going to share. So where can I start? I'm from a time before the internet. And for some of you, that might be kind of surprising. But yeah, there was a time before the internet. And that's when I was born and kind of brought up. But very much kind of, and if you want to know what it was like, essentially the time before the internet was very like Game of Thrones, right? It's just like that. That's exactly what it was like. There's just no dragons, and there was no Instagram, which is the thing that might surprise you most. You know, we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have social media. But in terms of I really rode the wave in terms of this transformation that's been going on in society around digitization. My school, when I was brought up, had the first computer in a school. I studied computer science, and when I was studying that at Kent University, the first Apple computer turned up. When I left university, I worked for the National Health Service, and the first PC turned up. And because I was a young guy, they said, "We don't know what to do with it. Can you figure it out?" And I sort of moved through a number of companies that were in this whole thing about digitization. And that took me through from the 80s through to the 90s to 2001. And in 2001, you could say that my career was peaking. I was a director of a big internet company. I had these things called options, which meant if I kind of hung in there, within 7-8 months' time, I was going to make a lot of money, and that was very, very exciting, you know. And everything was kind of going my way, right? But by June 2001, it had all disappeared. You know, there'd been a crash, the thing that's called the dot-com bubble burst. Our company contracted. People lost their jobs, and I was very much kind of burnt out. I realized afterwards I was very burnt out, and I just couldn't work there anymore, and I left. So suddenly from being someone that I thought was like a superstar and was going to make lots of money, I was kind of unemployed. My father died at this time. My partner left me, you know. But more crucially, you know, I had to struggle with something that I've been struggling with for years, which is I'd concede that I'd become an addict. I'd become addicted. I became addicted particularly to alcohol, and that was my thing, right? So suddenly I found myself in the middle of 2001, having gone from seemingly thinking all was going well to essentially everything had gone wrong, you know? And just as that was happening, 9/11 happened. Now, I know that 9/11 didn't happen to me, but it did mean that the external world became chaotic too, you know? Now, one of the things I've learned about transformation is that to have a breakthrough, a precursor to that is often to have a breakdown. And there's this wonderful phrase you hear, a rock bottom. And a rock bottom can sound really awful, but actually rock bottom, if you think about it, is when you hit rock bottom, it's something you can stand on. And it's a really starting point for a transformation, is when you hit that rock bottom and you put your feet on the ground, then something can happen. And afterwards, 18 years later, I look back and that's the most exciting and thrilling and thing that ever happened in my life, because I was really able to reboot my life and go on a process of transformation, which I'll kind of share with you. But I have to say at the time, it didn't feel like that. I wasn't like, yay, it's all gone wrong and everything's fallen apart. This is an opportunity for transformation. This is awful, right? And I think that's a starting point. So often if you find yourself in a period when it all seems to be going wrong, that's often where the biggest opportunity is, I've found. And that's one of the reasons that people don't take the journey of transformation, right? Because sometimes you've got to find that rock bottom. It's something you can declare for yourself. You can just go, we're at a rock bottom in society here. We need to kind of make a change. And sometimes, certainly in my case, it was forced upon me because I got to a point when literally I couldn't function anymore. So what was interesting, right? My personal life's not working and my work life's not working. And so I started to look at how I could reboot my career, and I started to look at how I could reboot my life. And how I rebooted my life is I reluctantly, through a series of stumbling processes and talking to people, found myself into a 12-step program, and I started to work that and find out about it, and I still do that today. And it's profoundly and radically transformed my life, and I'm very, very grateful for that. On the other hand, I decided to reboot my career. What do I do when the dot-com thing has disappeared, when no one wants to kind of buy digital stuff anymore? And what I realized was there's a lot of businesses in trouble. And so I started my career to help people transform their businesses, to take a business that's broken and to not so much fix it, but pivot it and reposition it. And I started with small companies, and that kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I got better and better at that. But what was interesting, I got to this point when I was working with companies using all these processes I'd learned through being a management consultant and listening to people and working with other people. And it worked pretty well, right? It made businesses work. It made organizations work. It made them perform in quite, a little bit better. But over here, I was experiencing this personal process, which was really radical and dramatic, where you actually had huge breakthroughs in terms of performance, in terms of recovery. And I started to think, what happens if I took this process and applied it over here? So that's what I started to do. And I found that an awful lot of people, particularly in business, aren't prepared to do that. They're not prepared to step outside of what they know. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But some were. And as I started to apply it, I found I had these extraordinary kind of breakthrough results, And so that's what I'm going to share. I'm going to share what I've discovered to be the difference between a transformational process, which can get you radical, dramatic results. The transformation is often a step shift. When a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, that is a step shift. It's profound. It can suddenly fly. It's remarkable. It's not like a linear process, rather than a standard change process, which is a linear process, right? So that's what I'm going to share with you. And it might confront some of you, because I imagine a number of you are students in the room, and you'll find out why. So I'm going to put a model up here, right? The conventional process that we go through when we want to change and improve ourselves. And it starts with a little circle here. I'm going to put a K in it. It's about knowledge, right? So what we do is we want to get better at something. We kind of go and get knowledge, right? And I imagine that's what drew a lot of you to this university. You thought, I want to become a lawyer or a biochemist or whatever it is. So what I do is I go to a university, because the assumption, and I'm sure there's a truth to it as well, is you come to a university, there's people that know stuff here, that know more than you about things, and you can assimilate knowledge, and by assimilating knowledge, you're going to get better at something, right? So this is kind of, there's a process we go through, which is we have knowledge. And then over here, we have this stuff, that's a D, what we don't know, right? DK. So we have what we know and what we don't know. And quite simply, what you go through is you go into this place and you go, okay, I don't know about that. I need to find out about it. So you're studying law and you're interested in international law, and you think, if I'm going to do international law, I need to understand, kind of how the law works in Nigeria, or I need to know how to speak Chinese or something like that. So you go off and you find out about it, and you find out about the law, and you read books, and you go to classes, and maybe you get a tutor who helps you learn Chinese, and your knowledge kind of grows. So what's interesting about this is, my assertion and my experience is, this is not the domain of transformation. This is the domain of linear change. Where does transformation happen? Where does innovation happen? Where do breakthroughs happen? And this big circle out here. Because what's interesting about this, in terms of knowing and not knowing, is you've got to know what you know, but you've also got to know what you don't know. right? Because if you don't know it, you can't find out about it. So you go, you know what, I don't know about Spanish, I'm going to go and learn about Spanish. I don't know about mechanical engineering, I'm going to go and find about it. So there's a circle here, which is the circle of what you don't know, you don't know. So what's an example of something you don't know, you don't know? You don't know, right? So this is where transformation happens, right? This is where you learn something you didn't even know existed and gives you a profoundly different experience of life, and things change. The question is, how do you access it, right? So I'm going to give you an example, because I imagine it's an example that most people in this room will understand, which is it's the example of riding a bike. Does anyone not know how to ride a bike? Really? Okay, well, I'll help you with that. Okay, a couple of people, but most people here, it sounds like you've ridden a bike. So what happens when you ride a bike, right? So you don't know what you don't know about riding a bike, okay? So you see someone riding a bike, and you think, that looks cool, and you get a bike, and you get on the bike, and what happens next? Well, the chances are you fall off, right? You fall off the bike, and you don't get it, and you think, well, that person just gets on the bike and just rides, and I get it, I fall off. And, you know, your parents might put some training wheels on. It's a really unpleasant experience. And what kind of happens is you wobble and you wobble and you wobble and you wobble and you fall off and you get frustrated and you get annoyed. And this can be a very long process. And then something happens. You have a transformation. What is the transformation you have when you ride a bike? You get balance. Suddenly you can balance. Something is reconfigured inside you and suddenly you can balance. You're on a bike and suddenly you're like, wow, I can balance. This is amazing, right? Now what's interesting about balance and why balance is a transformation is once you've got it, it doesn't go away. If you don't ride a bike for 20 years and you get back on a bike, you might be wobbly. You might even fall off a couple of times, but within a very short period of time, you can ride the bike because that transformation has occurred within you. But what's interesting about balance is try reading a book about it. Try explaining someone to you. What you need to do is you need to get on the bike and you essentially need to kind of move every muscle in your body at the same time. And if it moves that way, and if it moves that, you do that, and you find this, and you find that, you could explain it. You could write a manual about neuroscience and the triggering of muscles, but none of it would help. In fact, probably it would make it worse. You know, because someone would kind of read it and just get really, really confused. So what's interesting about the process of transformation is it's experimental and it's experiential. So you have to get on the bike, and you have to fall off the bike, and at some point, you have your own personal experience of the transformation, and you get balance. And once you get balance, you get it. I get balance. Try and describe balance to someone who's not got it. They're not going to be able to explain it, right? So this is the place. This is where we need to kind of hang out. But what's the access point? So what is the access to this don't know, you don't know? And the first thing I'd say, and there's really three things I think I've got to share with you. The first thing here is this word here. It really comes down to desire, right? And I found that a lot of TED Talks and talks about things are quite sort of functional. You know, they talk about what you need to do. But what you really need is desire. Desire is an emotion. You know, what happens is you actually see someone on a bike and for whatever reason you go, I really want to ride that bike. And you have a desire and it's in your heart. And you take a stand and you make a commitment that you're kind of going to get that. And then you will go through this process and you will hang out in that process because you know where you want to get, right? And I think that's the most crucial thing in terms of transformation is really like, what do I stand for? What matters to me? And not let go of it. And the second thing here is it's about, I'm going to write this down, letting go of knowing. And this is a difficult bit, and this is what I learned through my process of recovery from addiction, is that first and foremost, I had a real desire to get well. I got to a point in my life where I was really, really sick, and I saw and I met people who had got well, and I heard their stories, and I heard them talk about how they were in the gutter, and life had fallen apart, and they got really, really sick, and you know everything had gone wrong in their life. And I heard those stories, but I saw them, and now they're successful people, and now they're leading their lives in a different way. So in the same way that you see someone riding a bike and think, I want a bit of that, I saw these people and thought, I want a bit of that. I had a desire for a different life, a life that was different to the one that I wanted. But this is really where the big shift is, and why I said that I'm prepared to share this with people, because this is the thing that most people can't do. Because when I do my business consulting, once you've got a desire, once you create a vision and a commitment, what you do is you create plans, and you organize it all, and you go into the space of knowing, and you might even get some consultants in, and the consultants are really good at this, you know, and they go off and they give you all this information, and they create a big deck. I call it the $1 million deck. They charge you $1 million, and they give you a deck, and they go, there you are, thank you. And you've got a pile of paper, right? And that's kind of the way it works. But in the process of transformation, it's about letting go and sitting in a place which is, I actually don't know where to do this. And in terms of the emotion, I talk about the emotion again, it's about humility. It's about being able to sit in the space of going, I'm absolutely, totally committed to this, but I actually don't know how to do it. And once you can let go of that, and once you can get with a group of people who are prepared to sit in that space, then something can happen, right? And as I started to find out about this and I started to apply it to businesses, I decided I should start to share this. I started to write a book, and that book did come out eventually, and it's sort of kind of sharing this, and it's sharing stories about things that I experienced and all these kind of journeys I took around the world. And I started to write and research this book in about 2010. And just as I was doing it, the iPhone was already out, and the App Store was out, and suddenly all these apps started to pop up, and this thing called Instagram emerged, right? And a friend showed it to me, and I started using it, and I was going around Asia, so I put pictures on it, and she liked it, and all that kind of thing, and suddenly I'm using kind of Instagram. But what was really interesting is Instagram was formed in 2010. Within 22 months, it had 250 million users and was bought by Facebook for $1 billion. Now, there's a transformation, right? There is a small startup who clearly had a desire for something, who probably didn't quite know what they were doing, and within 22 months, they created an extraordinary thing, which I imagine most of you use. It really has changed the way we interact with people. But more interestingly for me at the same time was the story of Kodak. So Kodak were a film company, started in the 1800s. By 1996, Kodak was the 6th largest company in the world. It owned 70% of the world's photographic and film market. They were the movie and picture people. But more crucially, they had the patent for digital photography. They invented digital photography. And in the same month that Instagram was bought for $1 billion by Facebook, Kodak went out of business. And the question I asked myself is, how come Instagram could do it when it was just kind of 6 kids in a studio in San Francisco? Why couldn't Kodak do it, right? And it kind of came simply down to the fact that Kodak lived in this space. They knew an awful lot. They were experts in their field. But what they didn't know was that you could make a business out of data. Because they really had a business model, and their business model was about film, and it was about film stock. And they're like, well, we're not going to kind of like make something like Instagram where there's no film and film stock, right? So that was the discovery that Kodak got, or you say Instagram got, by being able to sit in this space, was they found out that you could make a business without selling film and film stock. You could get it out of data, right? And that only came out of the process. So it started off with the desire. So I started to look at what was the initial desire of Instagram, and it was really interesting. Is the initial desire of Instagram was that people wanted to kind of make images and share it with each other, and it was that simple. They just wanted to share their images with each other as simply as possible. And I went back to the beginnings of Kodak in 1890 and found out they had the same desire. When Kodak started in 1890, the desire was to share images with each other. A man called George Eastman, right? And he used the technology that was available at the time, which was film. Move forwards, obviously Kodak had completely forgotten about that, and Instagram grabbed hold of it. So I think that's the second thing that I've discovered. If you actually, once you have that desire, and you're able to let go, you hang on to that desire and you innovate. And innovation essentially is about curiosity, it's about jumping on the bike and it's sort of falling off. What happens is you get these insights. The insight I got as an addict was quite simple, was that the thing that distinguishes an addict is that if I take a substance, it sets off a craving in my body and I can't stop. I never realized that, right? The thing that distinguishes an alcoholic, if they put alcohol in their body, they set off a reaction. So the solution to that is not to actually have any alcohol, right? I didn't know that. I was brought up in a culture where everyone drank. Once I got that insight, which I could never have got from a book, I had to experience that for myself, then I had a chance for a transformation. What happened with Instagram is they set off with a desire to share images with each other, right? And the insight that they got is that you could actually make a business out of data, not film paper. And what happens when you ride a bike is you set off with this desire to look like the cool kids probably and be able to kind of zoom off on a bike. The insight you get or the experience you get is balance. So I'm going to leave you the third thing, and this is the process I think I'd suggest you see if this framework kind of fits as we hear people talking throughout the day. I think the third thing here is the thing, in terms of I talked about feelings, is that the thing that makes the real difference here is, sure, I have a desire, sure, I'm happy to let go, but what do I need to do now? And essentially, what I need to do, I'm going to say stay in the game, right? But essentially what it's about is tenacity, you know? And I think the thing that I've seen, actually, when I talk to people, and I get the privilege to do this, quite a lot of people who've actually gone through some transformation, who've caused some transformation, the only really difference, and I've seen it in the people organising this event, right, is they stuck at it. They had a tenacity to keep going. And then the other thing is to experiment, keep experimenting. So really that's what I found. For me, you know, now I'm 18 years sober. I had a desire to change my life. I had a desire to do something about it. The discovery I had was, as an addict, I should abstain. And how I kept going to 12-step programs, I kept getting help. I stayed in the game, I was prepared to do the work, I was prepared to try things out, I was prepared to experiment. And over a period of time, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And what I've seen with businesses and people who take on transformation is the same thing. And one of the things I would say I'd really ask you to think about, I'd challenge you to think about, at the moment we're going through a really profound transformation in our society, and particularly here in the United Kingdom. You know, we've got this thing called Brexit going on, which I don't have to tell you about, but what that's causing is a real schism in the society, a division in our society. So what's actually happening is we're in the don't know, I don't know space. But what's missing is this desire. What's missing is a vision. We no longer have a vision for our country. And if we actually had a collective vision for our country about what society should look like, if we agreed on that, what the society should look like, then we may be prepared to go through all the difficulty. Then we're prepared to kind of stay in the game. So I think that's what I'm kind of interested in, and what I'm looking forward to in the rest of the day is I'm seeing in and hearing in some of the conversations we're going to have different visions for what a society should look like, what masculinity should look like, you know, how we deal with women, how we deal with Islam, how we deal with language. These are the things I'm looking forward to. How can we create a collective vision that holds all those things so with society we're collectively excited for, and then we're prepared to kind of go through the difficulty of a transformation. So thank you very much. I'll leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day.